Hello, welcome to the series of talks on the what and how of the TMS. I am Dr. Ashwin, working as academic head at Asha Neuromodulation Clinic, Gachibowli. I'm sure in the last class we have learned and you could learn about the types and the basic technology of the TMS. And in today's session, let me briefly tell you what the magnetic field does to the brain. So we have learned in the last class that when the magnetic field is generated and sent into the brain, it induces an electric field, right? So if we see the effects of this TMS on the brain tissue, they also could be the effects due to the induced electric field and the effects due to the magnetic field also. Alright, so these are classified more or less as the classical and the non-classical effects of TMS. Coming to the classical effects of TMS. When the electric field, that is the induced electric field, is sent into a target area in the brain, it will try to modify the electric behavior of the neurons or the brain cells in that area. Okay, what do I mean by this electric behavior? See, each of these neurons in our body, I said, you remember 100 billions of neurons, right? So each of these neurons in the brain is a dipole. It's having an electric field around it. And when an electric external field is applied, there is a change in the dipole, and hence there is a change in the properties of the cell membrane of the neuron, and hence there is a change in excitable status of the neuron. Okay, for example, say in depression, I told you in 2003 they found out that some part of the brain called left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is underactive or hypoactive, right? So in this area, now when I am inducing an electric field, it will obviously change the electric behavior of the cells and the cells start functioning normally. Alright, and in this process, there is yet another thing which is happening called an action potential. An action potential simply means a current which is moving from one part of the neuron to another part. It's likely simply, you can imagine like a current flowing in a copper wire. Alright, so these action potentials can be generated in the primary area and they are taken to a secondary area or a distant area in the brain. Like for example, using this brain model, let me tell you, say this is a primary area somewhere on the left side of the brain where I am inducing a current. So when action potentials are generated there, they are taken to farther parts of the brain. Maybe they are taken to the adjacent part, the right side, or a posterior we call, or the back of the brain you call a parietal cortex, or furthermore inside affecting the limbic system we call like the mood, the motivation states, or the memory, etc. Okay, so these are called the secondary effects. When I am stimulating a particular brain area, because action potentials travel and they go to the different distant areas in the brain, they activate those parts of the brain also. Alright, and third effect in the classical effects is that when I do this repeatedly, it's not a question of just a single session or a single exposure. If I do it over a number of sessions, eventually the neurons tend to modify their function and modify their structure also. Okay, this beautiful mechanism is called synaptic plasticity. Repeated exposures of the neurons to this electric field will automatically produce some plastic changes in that area, which are a long-term effects which are going to happen. Got it? So now we have discussed about the classical effects of the induced electric field on the brain. Now what about the non-classical effects? The non-classical effects are directly due to the magnetic field which is going to affect the neurons. Viewers, let me tell you, these are awesome changes. But now, as of now, viewers, let me tell you, these non-classical effects are really awesome to look at. But as of now, there is not much of evidence into it, but this is a possibility. What is the possibility? Number one, the magnetic field directly can have magnetic spin effects on certain proteins inside the neurons or certain DNA or RNA material inside the neurons. Number two, magnetoreception by the genetic apparatus. The genes are susceptible to magnetic field and hence they can open or close. What you call as genetic expression can change. Number 3, neuroprotection. The neurons which are protected by the external factors, by the glial cells, this protection mechanisms, they are enhanced by the effect of magnetic field. And lastly, neurotropism. What does it mean? This is quite interesting. Under the effect of the TMS, there could be some generation of growth factors in the brain which can lead to growth of newer synapses in the affected areas. This we call as neurotropism. For instance, there is a chemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and these levels were shown to be, in an experiment done by the scientists, were shown to be increased after the exposure to TMS. So let us briefly sum up about today's session. What we have learnt is that the classical and the non-classical effects of the TMS on the brain tissue. The classical effects involve the effects in the primary area, like for example changing the membrane potential or the electric behavior of the cells in that area, and also by means of action potentials, secondary effects in the distant parts of the brain. Alright. And then coming to non-classical effects, we have seen that magnetic spin effects or quantum effects are possible by the magnetic field. And above that, genetic magnetoreception, that means changes in the gene patterns or gene expressions. And then the protection to neurons or growth of neurons is also possible. So that is for today. We will be meeting again in the next video, wherein I am going to talk in detail about synaptic plasticity. Thank you.